So if you've been watching the NBA this last week, you have seen the massive controversy that has erupted between China and the Houston Rockets, and by proxy, the NBA as a whole. And one has to wonder, does this have to do with more than just basketball? Does this have to do with other politics that happen to be going on? We're going to unpack exactly what's happened, just in case you have been living under a rock the last little bit. And we're going to talk about what's going on with China, what's going on with the Rockets, and give our opinions on it, and hopefully present you with a little bit more information so you can be informed. So let's dive in. Let's do it. This is a overtime episode of the Upshot Podcast, and we're going to dive in.
This is the Upshot Podcast. We're about to break down the biggest moments in the NBA.
Long three! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining!
And why they matter now. This is the Upshot Podcast.
All right, so it has been an interesting couple of days in NBAville, and I am Ben Atkins here with you, and alongside me tonight is somebody that I kind of like a lot, which is Nick Atkins. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm doing good. So, oh my Lord, from Friday on, we're doing a broadcast tonight. It's a Wednesday evening. And I tell you, it is just the weirdest thing. Tomorrow, we have some of our biggest NBA teams getting scheduled to go play, maybe in China. Maybe.
We'll see.
They're getting ready to go play in China some exhibition games before the season starts. This is something that, we try to do in a lot of different ways, a lot of places, whether we have teams from outside of the country coming into the U.S. or we play out. This is big, though, because whether you realize this or not, and I'm going to be honest, I did not realize that all of this before this week was this big. There is a monster piece of the market in China that supports the NBA, watches the NBA. And now a lot of that is in question in terms of, the money that China puts into the NBA, but also the fan base. What's actually going on? So, there's a lot to unpack here. So we're just going to timeline this first, and then we're going to get into some of our opinions on it. I think we start off with the tweet that was quite literally heard around the world on Friday night from a GM at the Houston Rockets. Nick, kind of walk me through what happened.
Sure. Rockets GM Daryl Morey. And, when it first happened, it was Friday, October 4th. And when he first tweeted it out, it was only up for a few minutes. He posted an image on Twitter, and it was, I believe it read, "Fight for Freedom, Stand with Hong Kong." And It was immediately pulled down by him. I mean, it was only up for a few minutes, but clearly it was up for long enough. And I'm not sure, that what we know about Daryl so far is Daryl's brilliant, and I think he's a brilliant guy. He's also known to get in a little bit of trouble sometimes, and he goes on podcasts and he'll go on radio and say some controversial stuff sometimes. It's fine when the controversy is, no, I actually think that statistically James Harden is a better offensive player than Michael Jordan, right? Like you hear that, you're like,
right,
whatever side of the fence you're on, you're like, well, that's bullshit, or, I agree, or I don't care, right? Like that's fine. It doesn't matter that much, right? Of course, that's who he's saying about. That's his guy. But this tweet, I'm not sure there's been a bigger tweet in the NBA, maybe ever. Okay. And so obviously I don't think that he considered the ramifications of it. But here we are.
What's so interesting is, for me, there is talking politics, which I try to stray away from, even though I have some very solid opinions that, I put out
Sure.
there. I definitely have opinions that don't necessarily fall on one side of the political spectrum, but, my opinions are pretty set on a lot of things. I love hearing from other people. But I think what's interesting to me about basketball is one of those places that if you really pay attention to the pundits like us, like people that are talking about basketball, a lot of the people that do this professionally for a living do it in a way that they are trying to divide you. They're trying to say something controversial. They're trying to stir up a conversation. It's very much like politics. You know what? We don't quite have that in like baseball, professional baseball.
No.
We don't. We sort of have some of it in football
baseball
now.
Could use it. Yeah, maybe baseball could use a little bit more of it.
Right. But we sort of have it in football. That's happened over the last couple of years. But the NBA has always sort of been this place where you could go talk about things, you could stir up controversy, and at the end of the day, everybody goes home smiling because it's sports and nobody really gets into it. But this is a person that's been really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
but this time it turned into something a lot deeper. So right after this tweet gets pulled down, right around, I believe it was 10:54 p.m., so almost 11 o'clock on a Friday night,
Yep.
The owner of the Houston Rockets, Tillman, comes in and he says, listen, this is not our opinion as an organization. And that's the thing. So, gets out there and says it. But yeah, the damage is already done.
Yeah.
It's far too late. This thing has been copied all over the place. People have it on record, and it came from his official account. And so over the next 24 hours or so, everything just starts to fester and blow up. And then we start getting reaction out of China. And so around Sunday in China, this is where we start to get some of this very interesting stuff. China comes out and they say, hey, listen, we're going to suspend all cooperation with, and I think this is an important distinction. They didn't come out and say, we're going to suspend cooperation with the NBA. They came out and said, we are suspending all cooperation with
the Houston Rockets. Right.
And this was the first sort of thing. And this is one of those things that at this point, I'm kind of like, yeah, sure. Okay. So this is not, we're just going to slap the Rockets on the wrist and because we don't agree with what was said. And okay, fine. Everybody has the right to do that and I think that's okay. But getting down to this, there is a monster, and I think we have to go back now. There is a monster protest happening in Hong Kong, and it's been happening. This is not a protest that started a week ago.
No, it's been going on for a while. Yeah,
this is like 2 to 3 months at this point. That at the very least, that it's been a monster protest. Not that it started. People have been out in the streets protesting in Hong Kong, for quite a while. And we should actually sort of give a little background. We're going to try to stay off of one political side right now. We'll get to that later. But let's talk about a little bit about what people are protesting. And then we're going to jump back to the China reaction that happened Sunday after the tweet on Friday. So, Nick, walk us through it.
To try to keep it as simple as possible from what I understand about it, and we've known about this for a while, these protests have to do with, again, we're talking about Hong Kong, and then it's easier to, if you couch it as Hong Kong and then mainland China, okay? And so Hong Kong is part of China, okay, but it's got some sovereignty, and there was I don't know if you want to call it a bill, but there was a law in question that essentially, to be brusque about it, was saying that if there were criminals in Hong Kong, they could be extradited to the mainland, okay? And you read about this over here, you don't really think anything of it. You think, fine. In fact, I wasn't, I knew about the protest, but I wasn't even really sure about the political conflict between Hong Kong and I say Beijing, but I'm really talking about mainland China. And this brought up problems because essentially it seems like the arguments from the Hong Kong side are, look, this is a slippery slope when you're dealing with an autocracy, right? Which is anytime someone gets in trouble over here, if there is a political opponent over here that certainly stands for the sovereignty or any type of sovereignty for Hong Kong, what are you going to do? Since you can extradite them, what kind of charge are you going to cook up to get them exported to the mainland, right? And so that's where it kind of starts.
We get into a situation where people can disappear.
Exactly.
And that's, if you really want to boil it down, it's we've got people in Hong Kong that are upset because there's a lot of things we take for granted here in the United States, but these people could all of a sudden disappear into a system that is not necessarily going to be favorable to them overall.
Right. And that's a really good way to couch that, because I think, just all the reading that I've done on this, I keep coming back to, wow, I'm so glad we don't have to deal with these things. I know that's a simple way to put it, but you really are talking about here being a free country, which we'll get into more here in a second. And freedom of expression over there, it doesn't really exist. Right. And
right. So, getting into that, we've got all these people that are protesting, and they are protesting because they want changes in this. They want freedoms, and they want this to be something. And so we're not just talking a small group of people. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Like, lots of people are demonstrating. And you are forgiven if you are someone that lives in the U.S. and you have not heard about this on the news, because this is something that has not been mentioned by, major news organizations in a really big way. And it's really interesting to kind of figure out why. There is a massive uprising happening, and we're not hearing about it here. And it's because I think a lot of reasons we're not hearing about it is because nobody that's sort of in a position to inform us on what's going on is really speaking up about this, which, leads you down to some paths as to why. And once again, we get back to the NBA. China is a massive market for U.S. intellectual property and to make money with United States-based intellectual property. And if you really start digging into this, you start seeing a lot of organizations that have intellectual property over there that's making a fortune. And if you are a South Park fan and you just recently watched the recent South Park that came out this last week, there was an entire episode about this, which was, of course, comedy, but also right on the nose as to what's happening the Wednesday before this tweet comes out. And, with the NBA. Yeah. And there's a particular scene in this where we see some movie stars, we see some sports stars that are going over to China to actually negotiate some deals. It's hilarious. But anyways, getting back into Friday night, we have this tweet. We have the owner of the Rockets saying, hey, this doesn't represent us. And then on Sunday, the 6th, now we have China. And we're talking political communist China. And listen, I'm not saying communist in any sort of leaning right now. I'll get to that. Don't worry. But we have communist China coming out and saying, we will not tolerate this. We are going to suspend airing any Houston Rockets games on television. And just by the way, more than 600 million people watched NBA games in China last year.
More than here, maybe. I think actually
more than here, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it would not be hard considering the number of people that are there versus the number of people that are actually here. So 600 million people watch NBA games, and that sort of tells you the kind of market that we have here. Tencent Sports said it would suspend live streaming the games as well as reporting news about the particular team. So if you think about it, nearly 500 million people in China watched NBA programming on Tencent platforms last season. That was what they reported. So we get into this, and so this is what comes out Sunday. And now everybody in the NBA is starting to lose their minds a little bit. And so this brings us to Monday, October 7th, which do you want to take this one? This is where the NBA starts to get involved.
And it's interesting to kind of go back and do a little revisionist history here about what could have happened. I mean, like you said, at this point, it's pretty much, oddly enough, it's China v. Houston Rockets. Right. I mean, the NBA hasn't released a statement yet. And the Houston Rockets, it is important that it's that team. And just real quick, it's because the Rockets, if they're not the most popular team over there, they're damn close. And that's because Yao Ming, I think it was from like 2002 to sometime in the 2010, 2011, something like that. And he was one of the first big Asian stars to come over and play. I'm sure you remember that, Ben. I don't know how deep we were following the NBA at that time, but it was really something. And so the Rockets have kept a giant following there for a really long time. And so when you look at this, you say, if Tillman Fertitta says, I'm going to fire this guy, and he's fired, and then maybe something else happens in the news, which is not hard over here, maybe it's done. Okay, maybe it's over. But then on Monday, the NBA releases a statement, and this statement was polarizing. Oddly enough, it unified politicians here, which is extremely hard to do.
Right.
But it was also polarizing in how it was interpreted. Okay, so the NBA releases a statement. It says that it recognizes that Daryl Morey's views have deeply offended many of our friends and fans in China, which is regrettable. Right, and it goes on to state some other things, but there's never a full-out apology in there. At least I don't read one. Right. But it was certainly interpreted that way from U.S. politicians on both sides of, I can't believe you're kowtowing to this and you're selling out an American citizen, essentially for his freedom of expression, right? And for something that arguably is human rights issues, and certainly human rights issues happen in China all the time. Like, are we really going to kowtow to China just because of our economic interests? Okay, and to make matters worse too, is that statement was obviously released over in China as well. And there's always a bit of a difference, right, between the languages. And I'll have to pull up exactly. I'll do it, Ben, and I'll let you riff a little bit here. But
sure.
Essentially, it was a completely different statement, right? And it said that something to the effect of, we're deeply disappointed in Mr. Morey. And that was not in the United States statement that was released, right? And so after that, the NBA has to come back out and says, by the way, the statement in English was our official statement.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you go back and look at this, there was one little extra sentence in the statement that came out to the Chinese press, and it sort of made a difference. And yet it was put the NBA in a very odd spot. And so at this point, not only is the tweet gone away, the original tweet, and that was, like I said, minutes up, but now we've got Daryl who comes in and he starts tweeting again that he's apologizing. So on Monday, he's talking about, basically he says this: I did not intend my tweet to cause any offense to the Rockets fans and friends of mine in China. I was merely voicing one thought based on one interpretation of one complicated event. I have had a lot of opportunity since that tweet to hear and consider their perspectives. And he goes on to say this: I've always appreciated the significant support of our Chinese fans and sponsors have provided. And I would hope that those who are upset will know that offering or misunderstanding them was not my intention. My tweets are my own and in no way representative of the Rockets or the NBA. And that's kind of where he comes on. Now, this is where, once again, we've got politicians piling on now. On the NBA, not really apologizing, not really taking a stance. Everybody starts to get mad at the NBA at this point. We have a very big figure in the U.S. because, well, he happens to own outright one of the teams in the U.S. who is very much in the public eye right now. The Brooklyn Nets, Joseph Tsai, comes out and he has a statement, and he voices his displeasure with the way all of this is being handled and how people don't understand. And this is where, I'm going to stay right here. This is where when Joseph Tsai says this, because I respect him as a businessman, I start to take a second look at things and say, maybe I don't understand things. And that's the level of respect I have for this person going into this. But the more you dig into it, the more you start realizing the pure amount of interest, business interest, that Joseph Tsai has in China.
Oh, yeah.
Because in case you don't know, he's pretty much the number 2 guy, if not the actual number 1 guy. If you've ever seen Jack Ma speak, not to take anything away from him, which is the head guy over at Alibaba over there. If you've ever seen him speak, he doesn't really hold his own that well. Joseph Tsai, on the other hand, completely different case. And he's the guy that's sort of in the business and the organizational part behind Alibaba. And so monster organization, that's where he made his money. That's how he's been able to really come over and do so well in the sports world, is because he had this great business background. And let me just go ahead and say, I think Joseph Tsai is an absolute genius when it comes to business.
I do too.
But when he speaks out on this, while I absolutely respected what he had to say, because that's his right as a somebody in the U.S. to say that, and really as a human citizen to say these things, it's hard for me to take that opinion on just
without a grain of salt.
Yeah, without a grain of salt, because of his massive business interest in China, which are controlled by the Chinese government. I'm not saying that he does not feel that way. However, it's very hard for me to take that, without taking the other into account.
Well, and you've got to look. Yeah, you've got just to touch on that real quick, and because there was one part I read his statement, and you and I talked about this statement earlier in the week, and I think we had certainly an initial disagreement on it.
We had a good back and forth on it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, sure. And I do think it's a very well-written statement, and I certainly appreciate the history lesson. And I'm not saying that tongue in cheek at all, because we could get into an entire separate discussion about, Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich commenting on it and what the president thinks of that. And I don't think that this issue is not nuanced.
Right.
You understand what I mean? I mean, I do think it's extremely complicated, and I do think it's fair for people to come out and say, look, I can't touch that now. Now, look, is the NBA gagging some of these people? I would hope not. And I don't think I'm not sure the NBA could. Okay. I mean, I know they could try, but the only way that you could reach these people is say, hey, look,
hey man, this isn't the NFL. We can't do that.
Exactly. And if you're the NBA, it's like, look, I'm not going to tell you what to say, but this could hit you in the wallet. You guys, you know what I mean? I mean, because it really could. It affects everything. But my one issue with Joseph Tsai, and it's not his fault that he's been so successful in business with Alibaba, and I'm really glad he's the owner of the Brooklyn Nets. I think it's fantastic for the NBA. If you're him, you've got to be looking at this like, what the hell did I just get myself into? Because I just purchased this NBA team. Part of it, and part of a giant swell of income coming in from this are these contracts. right? And so
Right.
I've bought into this team. I've spent over $2 billion buying into this team, and lo and behold, we're about to lose it, right?
Right.
And also exactly what you said about his other business interest over there too. He is a prime example of somebody who could be direly financially affected by this. Now, that I don't know the guy personally, so I just have to take that into account when I read his statement.
Well,
My one issue.
Here's the thing, and we need to say this before you get into your one issue because this is important.
Sure.
A business here in the U.S. functions one way. A business that operates primarily in China serves at the pleasure of China.
That's correct.
And so go ahead and get to your one thing, but I think it's important that to understand the distinction as a business owner here versus there. This is
the masters.
This is
right.
very nuanced and interesting. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm going to read one part of it, and it's after he goes through a bit of the history lesson and a bit of when Hong Kong was I think they called it the Great Handoff in 1997 when China got it back. And I don't want to be insensitive to that. I understand that sovereignty is important to them. I understand
Extremely.
that.
Yes.
But I'm going to quote here. It says, "The one thing that is terribly misunderstood and often ignored by the Western press and those critical of China is that 1.4 billion Chinese citizens stand united when it comes to the territorial integrity of China and the country's sovereignty over her homeland. This issue is non-negotiable." I find, how the hell would we know that or believe that? You know what I mean? All of the news is controlled by state TV. Okay. The news is very controlled, even when it gets over here. Okay. And I find it, I don't know, but I find it hard to believe that they're standing united in the fact that Hong Kong is definitely a part of the mainland and we do not take challenges to sovereignty lightly, because I find it hard that they give a damn. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, I don't, I know it's important to the government. I find it, at least I have, and again, maybe I need to educate myself more. I haven't seen anything from the people or anything like that would suggest that it's that important. And I'll probably never find out because of how the government is set up.
I think the problem is if you're sitting where we are right now, is there are so many things in China way before this that are censored. There is a massive level of censorship into what actually ends up in the homes of the Chinese people. And there's a massive level of censorship as to what happens there that gets out to us. And so it's very difficult. Once again, it's not that I don't believe Joseph Tsai, that he believes this. It's just that it's hard to take his opinion without the other glaring things that are standing right behind him. And it's the same thing with China. Everything that comes out, sure, I want to be sensitive to it. I want to say, you know what, there are some problems here that we've not faced in the U.S. that they have faced for a long time. And they've had to do what they have had to do to keep everything in check and keep people safe. But at the same time, when you're also keeping people from information, and there's a level of that here in the U.S. too, when you're keeping people away from things that could help them make decisions, when you are controlling the flow of information to the level that they have been controlling it for how long they've been controlling it, it's hard to take anything said at face value without all those things standing behind that opinion saying, be careful, this may not be what it seems. Exactly. Right. And so, not to be insensitive, but like I said, the problem here is it's a PR problem. It's hard to see anything coming out without that flavor of, censorship behind it. And so that's sort of where we're at. And so we get to Tuesday, October 18th. And this is, like I said, this is Monday. The NBA comes out. Adam Silver says some things. It gets widely misinterpreted.
October
across
8th,
the board.
by the way. Sorry, you said 18th.
Yes, this is October 8th. No, that's great. Sorry, it's October 8th. My fault. And this is where I have to really give props to Adam Silver. I don't care what anybody says. If you disagree with me, that's okay. But the way that he came out and handled things on Tuesday the 8th, now maybe he was a little bit late. Maybe it should have been expressed better the first day, but I feel as if the way this was handled was done well. And this is maybe, like I said, just to paraphrase what he said, he's like, listen, we're not going to censor our players. We're not going to censor employees. They have the freedom because this is what our country stands for, basically. And don't let me put words into his mouth, but he says, we're not going to do that. I am a fan of this being the way that we conduct ourselves. We pride ourselves in that. But I am upset that people are upset.
Yeah.
And listen, that's what else can you say? Because, I'm with you. You can't say, listen, because you have a lot of money into our organization, because we enjoy a lot of, perks because of this, and all of a sudden one person tweets something, it's up for a few minutes, they apologize, and you're now threatening these things. This is a control play.
Yeah.
That, without any, that's the thing. This is not we're going to talk, we're going to figure it out, we're pissed, what are you going to do about it? This is absolutely, we are trying to control the way things are because we have money in this. And
well, this plays it. Yeah, it plays into China's response
to a lot of things. Yes,
exactly. And so what's somewhat sad is that the NBA makes the most news because the NBA makes a lot of news because the NBA is awesome, right, Ben? I mean, we love it. But
exactly.
Just in the past year, okay, you've got businesses like Mercedes-Benz. I can't remember if it was in the last year, but it was definitely recently, where Marriott, I think it was something to the effect, and I hope I'm not confusing it with Mercedes-Benz, but they had listed Tibet as a separate country or something on their website or something where you're searching for a room, right? And China has a policy of how they deal with these things, and that is you're going to apologize hard, and we'll forgive you. Right. And so something just as simple as listing Tibet as a separate country from the mainland on the website. We want an apology or we're pulling money from you. Right. And sitting in our chairs, I don't know that this happens until the NBA incident happens. Right. And so you've got other American companies that, you can criticize the NBA all you want for dealing with China when we know that we've clearly got some philosophical differences with them politically, but we're all doing it. There's Starbucks over there. There's Kentucky Fried Chicken over there. All these places are over there, right?
Full disclosure, I have run a business that had things sourced from China.
Exactly.
Before. So,
exactly.
I think that there's good relationships here. But the problem is we are reaching something that is sort of a tipping point that we've been in. Like I said, This was something that was on making fun of a lot of American companies the Wednesday before this happens on a very silly show, but a very politically conscious show, South Park. And what's so funny about all of this is what is happening right now is on Monday and Tuesday when the NBA comes out, Adam Silver gets on mic and he says, look, we deeply regret that we offended you. But it's not, hey, we're sorry that this happened and let's fire this guy or get rid of him. When this happens, now we are seeing lines drawn in the sand, which takes me to Wednesday, October 9th. And this is when it's not just the Rockets anymore. This is when, and this is earlier today, this is all happening in real time. And we start to see that every single NBA partner in China is suspending their ties. And every single one of them. And then it's funny how quickly all of them coordinated this correctly. And it was a coordinated news effort. It was a coordinated all of the partners at once. This is not the way this happens.
It's top down.
By the way,
it's absolutely top down. Right.
This is if this is individual companies, and you can see this happen. If somebody says something stupid on the air, that is their right to do it in the U.S. But typically, how this works is one company after the other starts to cut their ties with them if they're sponsors, and it's individuals. But this didn't go down this way. And this is one more clue that something is deeply off. And if I say that, and it's just because that I'm not used to, what actually the way business is done in China, forgive me. I understand that. But the hints that is coming forth, and I know everybody listens to this podcast for political views, but the idea is we've got all of these companies cutting ties at once. It's a coordinated effort. And now this brings us to the next thing. Tomorrow, and we're going to know about the time that this podcast, it's going to hit the airwaves tonight, late, but about the time that everybody wakes up tomorrow in the U.S., we're going to start seeing, did the Lakers and the Nets get to play in Shanghai?
Sure.
Are they going to get to play on Thursday? And there was a rematch that was supposed to happen on Saturday. And so this is crazy. We've got people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke a little bit about this earlier too. What's crazy about it is what's going on around this is you've literally got giant signage on the side of buildings in Beijing, all over China, with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving being ripped down. Right? I mean, they are coming off. And so What's complicated to me is I'm surprised actually that the games have not already been canceled and that our guys aren't coming home. Okay.
Exactly.
But maybe that speaks to me that this is posturing. And it's again, what complicates this issue and what you spoke about really well earlier is the statements. There is a clear lineage of requested apologies from China that are clearly and routinely is the better word given. Okay. And yeah, we're sorry. We screwed up. We're so, and you write some of the apology for us. We're sorry that we didn't recognize the sovereignty. NBA is not doing it. And I think, I guess a good question is to see whether the NBA really meant to have kind of such a milquetoast first response, right? Because the NBA actually had to clarify we didn't apologize, right?
Right.
Which
and they came out
technically
and
could
said
make
that.
things worse, right? I mean, and so
and it did
exactly, and that's why we're here. This has progressively gotten worse. Now, again, but you're going to eat it if you come out and you actually do apologize, right? You're going to eat it stateside here, and you should, okay? And so the reason that this is so dangerous is that this kind of routine apology tour that China requests and frequently gets and we don't hear about because it's done before it kicks up any dust at all is not happening, right? And so I question whether the games are going to go down. I find it odd that they're not already canceled. There's been event after event canceled, but as far as you and I know, up to this point, they're still there, right? And these things are still planning on going down. And you wonder if this is just a, hey, let's prove to everybody how mad we are, and then we're going to move on. I got to be honest with you. If I'm betting now, I'd be surprised if the games happened. But what do you think?
I think that tomorrow is going to be the biggest game of chicken the NBA has ever played.
Okay.
And I think that what happens tomorrow is going to be interesting. I think the games aren't going to happen.
Okay.
I think that we're going to have players on a plane coming home, and I think that we're going to wake up hearing about it. I might be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I think that somebody, and I feel like there's a lot of phone calls happening right now while we're talking, and so I think it's interesting. We're already hitting the next day there, and we're getting into some interesting things, but it's going to be interesting to see. And I don't like to normally get in this kind of political talk, but I think this NBA that we love is in a critical moment right now. I don't think it's in a moment that can make or break the NBA by any means. We're really strong here, but I think the NBA, this is going to be one of those grow up moments.
Yeah.
And
it's
as silly as it might seem that basketball is this important to everything that's going on right now, this is something that I think everybody has to say, listen, we believe in people's rights to express themselves nonviolently. And that is political as I'm going to get tonight, is we believe in people's, their ability, their right to tell you what they think as long as they're not being violent. And if you look at what's happening here with people speaking out about this, if you look at what's actually happening in Hong Kong with people speaking out, that's the problem. We've got people that are protesting nonviolently. If somebody's protesting violently, hey, listen, that you're not allowed to do that. But it's hard to get on the side of with our history as a country, and excuse me for being the ignorant American here, quote unquote, but it's hard for me to get on the side of someone or a country that is telling people that they can't have some essential freedom. And I think speech is a big one. That's one that the reason we get to do this podcast, I don't overlook that sometimes we say some stuff that's controversial. This will probably be one of those things. But we get to say it because we're allowed to. And I think there's a lot of people over there that are scared, but they're out in the streets anyway. And for some guy who, in the grand scheme of things, does not matter, to get on Twitter and to say something, and then all of a sudden it turned into a worldwide incident, I think that, yes, as the NBA, they've got to stand up. They've got to keep standing up. And they've got to say, listen, we do feel terrible. We feel terrible that we've hurt people. We feel terrible that we've made people take all of this basketball stuff as something more than fun and something that builds people up. But at the same time, we are not going to censor our people. That's at the core of the NBA from the very time that it began to what it's evolved into. It's a place where people can speak their minds.
And I couldn't agree more with you. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to this point, you've got to look at what both sides have to offer. What China has to offer is a ton of money, right? And a ton of exposure and a ton of audience and growing the game, which is as beautiful as it gets. I mean, I'm all for that. I love that. But
I want basketball in China. I want people that love basketball to be able to watch basketball,
absolutely.
and to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So.
And again, what we have to offer is we're the best game in the world. I mean, there is no other NBA. You want to try to XFL the NBA, you go right ahead. It's not going to work. Okay. The flip side of that is, look, if we can't come to terms here and China completely pulls out, it's such a big financial loss. You're probably talking about a lower salary cap next year, right? I mean,
which affects
exactly
everything.
It's a huge hit, but it's a stalemate. And at some point, not to sound hokey, but you've got to be like, look, we're never ever going to ask our people to suppress their feelings on things. And we understand that you're going to why that is offensive to you, right? This is our position. We're different politically. Couldn't be any more different politically. And
right.
Can we work together? Yay or nay? And if we're going to have to go through this, unfortunately, maybe we're not going to be able to. Now, I think some of the protests over there maybe have gotten violent. I mean, I
think so too. Let's not cloud that, but we're not hearing about a lot of that too. So
exactly, and so I understand it, and I understand. There's even some whispers going on before this that at least from Chinese publications that Americans have something to do with the protest, which I don't. Who knows? Any reporting you get from over there, you've got to take with a grain of salt. But the fact of the matter is, either we're going to be able to work together or not, and there are philosophical differences. But even though there was a misstep at the outset, I like what Silver's done. I'm with you on that, Benny. Look, we understand we got differences. We understand there may be a price to pay. We're ready to pay it, but we do not gag our players here. We do not gag, personnel. We don't gag. General managers, we don't gag anybody in administration.
Absolutely.
We believe in freedom of expression. And when you see what CCTV released, this is what I'll close with. Silver said that the NBA did not expect CCTV to cancel plans to show the Lakers-Nets games. And they said that's fine. But what CCTV said, and it's a really chilling quote, was that, let me find this real quick. It was that if freedom of expression, I'm going to paraphrase, it says something that we don't believe freedom of expression couches in, talks about sovereignty and with our country. That's not included in freedom of expression. Yeah. And that was really chilling to read it, just to be honest with you, because that's completely goes against what we believe freedom of expression to be.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key. And so, listen, we're not sitting here thinking that we have this all figured out there or that we've seen every side of the story. We want to hear from you. If you have an opinion on this, especially if you are in a position to where you can give us the other side of the story, we want to hear it. So go to upshotpodcast.com, leave us a comment. We want to hear what you have to say. One of the things that we've always told ourselves is we're not going to be afraid when we do this podcast to tackle these kinds of issues. This is the kind of thing that, in my head, I'm like, sports fans don't want to hear about this. Sports fans don't want to talk about this, but this is something that is deeply affecting our sport and all the things that could be happening for generations to come in our sport because of that. So we wanted to make sure we tackled it. Also, Nick, I got to go ahead and throw this in here. Zion played great tonight.
Oh, Zion looks great. I cannot wait. I really thought it would have been great on this podcast if you and I could, if we're going to do Rocket stuff, if we could just predict, like, is this, Harden Westbrook thing going to work? And I think we're probably talking about the biggest story, and I don't know how long it's going to go on, man, but I got a feeling it's going to be around a while. And that's the NBA. I mean, it really is. And there's always going to be something to talk about, but between you and me and everybody listening, I sure am ready to talk about hoops, man.
I'm ready to talk about hoops too, but once again, I got to say, this sports has driven progressive stuff for a very long time, and I'm so proud that sports do that, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So, thanks for being here tonight, Nick. I know that you had to take time out of your schedule. If you've been listening to this and you're listening to this overtime podcast, which is what we're calling it, when it's sort of outside the lines of what we do or right as a game ends, we appreciate you listening. Let us know what you think. Go to upshotpodcast.com. Leave us a comment. This is going to be up under the show notes pretty much right away. We're going to upload this thing. It's going to be live very quickly because it's sort of one of those things that we want to get out there. Let us know what you think, and we so appreciate you listening. We want to hear what you think. Even if you disagree with us, that's freedom of speech to me. We want to hear it. We want to know everything that you think about this issue. Let us know. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Upshot NBA Podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure to click the subscribe button so you can get a new Upshot episode every week. And make sure to leave us a review on your podcast app as soon as you're done listening.